Welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA, which we're doing on Wednesday afternoon. Altering our schedule up a little bit this week because we've got some stuff going on. Joining me from San Jose, California, Tim Bontemps.
Hello, everybody.
And joining me from Dallas, Texas, home on the range, is MacMahon.
Howdy, partners.
Nobody loves tears more than Tim Bontemps. And he loves to roll out tears in the summer. And I'm having fun with him, but actually, he has a very good story with Kevin Pelton that published today. This was a Wednesday.
Notice that actually, MacMahon?
Huh?
So did you notice that actually threw in there?
Yeah, but I would replace it with surprisingly. Also, add that Kevin Pelton clearly carried you on this one. But go on, Wendy.
Yeah. Anyway, I actually like this concept, and I think it's a good thing to look at this point in the calendar. The NBA all-in tiers. In other words, how all in are some of these teams? And considering that we have seen multiple teams cut guys with $100 million on their salaries, multiple teams trade complete control of their drafts for the foreseeable future away.
Some both.
just so people are clear on what exactly the parameters of the story were. It's not necessarily all. It's the idea was to break teams into groupings of what version of all in they are, and like
what are you all in on?
That's right. That's the conceit of the story. What are you all in on? There's a different. Not every team goes into the season thinking they're going to win the title. So what is basically the objective?
Right. It's not hard to figure out what the Utah Jazz are all in on, for example. It's right. Not on winning the West. It's on winning something else. Okay. So I like this story as much as I tease Bontemps. I don't tease Pelton. I have too much respect for him, but
he's just not as fun to push around either.
Yeah, he's, I'm not even going to go
What's nicer?
He's a robot. Bontemps is really irritable. You can get under his skin pretty easy.
Well, the thing is, Bontemps is 6'5". You can't stuff him into a locker. Pelton,
I can.
Metaphorically. Listen, Bontemps has won fights. I've seen it.
There's a YouTube out there.
That is true. That is true.
All right, let's start with the first tier, which is all in on winning a championship before their window closes. Tim, take it away.
We had three teams in this tier: Denver, Milwaukee, and Minnesota.
And interestingly, two of those, it's like, hey, you've got perennial MVP candidates that are midway through their prime. Obviously, Joker, Giannis. Whereas, as you point out in here, the Bucks, I guess Ant is ascending towards MVP candidate status, hasn't quite gotten there yet, but an ascending superstar who's not even hit his prime yet. So it's interesting that the Timberwolves are in that same tier, despite the fact that the face of their franchise is at a very different stage of his career.
Some of these teams are a little hard to fit into a clean grouping together. Brian does not like too many tiers. Didn't really want to get into trying to have 30 different tiers.
He would if he could, though. I just want to be clear.
For example, I would say, while I understand what Milwaukee did this summer, I don't think many people would truly say the Bucks are a championship contending team with their current roster. But again, if you're trying to look at it through the prism of, trying to get this done before the window closes, obviously the Bucks have been on a timer for a while now, which is why they made what I think we'd all agree was a fairly desperate maneuver to waive and stretch Damian Lillard in a record amount of money to go sign Miles Turner as a free agent. As it relates to Minnesota, the reason why we ended up having him in this tier and why I pushed to have him in it is this team is still very reliant on Rudy Gobert and to a lesser extent Mike Conley, and those guys are in their mid to late 30s, and there's not clear replacements for them. Despite the fact that they drafted Rob Dillingham a year ago, I'm not convinced Rob Dillingham is the long-term answer to replace Mike Conley. And despite the fact they paid Naz Reid $125 million this summer, I'm not convinced Naz Reid is a long-term replacement for Rudy at center either.
Well, I'm not convinced of that. I think that if there's a long-term replacement at center on the roster, then it's the guy they just drafted, the fellow Frenchman, Johan Berenger. But he's a springy 7-foot ball of clay at this point.
Yeah, I mean he certainly showed a lot of potential. I mean, he had the 7 block game at Summer League against the Pelicans, but I think we're a little ways away from being able to reliably say he's got a chance to be that kind of player going forward.
The window is very defined for Denver. It's as long as Joker's one of the best players in the world, assuming that his future is in Denver, which I think is still a pretty solid bet. The window is very defined for the Bucks. That's as long as Giannis is one of the best players in the world and on their roster, which is much murkier. The window's not so well defined for the Wolves just because Ant has so much runway in front of them. But, can they kind of to your point here, how much more time do they have left with this supporting cast? And then can they kind of recreate or reconstruct a supporting cast while Ant is, still ascending?
Can I pull off onto a Bucks conversation here real quick?
Yes.
Miles Turner's contract, 4 years, 104 million, was it?
I think it's
107,
108.
108.
Actually, I think
It's in that ballpark.
let me get to the Bobby Marks mobile. I think the final numbers actually came in a little bit even higher than was originally
Yeah, I
reported.
think it might be 112. Let me do some quick math while you're talking, Brian.
Okay, so I'd like to apply our strategy.
Test.
Can that contract be traded?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, MacMahon.
Again, every contract can be traded. Can they flip that for value? I think that's probably going to be a little bit more difficult.
108.8 million over 4 years. I would say Miles Turner, as we saw last year in the playoffs, although he struggled in the finals, has a skill set as a 3-point shooting big who can protect the rim that is desired around the league. And I think they could, if they decide to, like let's say Giannis a year or two from now says, I've had my fun in Milwaukee, I'm ready to go. As long as Miles Turner is healthy, I think they could flip that deal and get some value back for it for a team that's trying to win right now and wants somebody with that skill set. Like, for example, he'd be a nice fit on the Lakers right now. He would be a nice fit on the Warriors right now. He would be a nice fit on, again, we were just talking
Phoenix.
about the Wolves. I mean, sure, Phoenix doesn't have anything to trade, but like long term, he could be a potential long term answer to replace Rudy Gobert in Minnesota if they're trying to do something with that in a year or two, right? Like, he has a skill set that should age decently, and that's not a it's an in market, or it's a within the realms of the market contract.
Here's why I'm asking about that right now. Bontemps, you and I were live on national television when we found out about Dame Lillard's wave and stretch to sign Miles Turner.
Facts.
And literally in the moment, I said it's like mortgaging your mortgage to buy a sports car. I still don't like it. But as I've talked to people across the league and thought more about it, while I don't necessarily think it's the primary reason, I think that maneuver was an elaborate hedge on what Giannis wants to do. And here's why I'm saying that with a month of reflection and talking to people in the league. Yes, ideally what you want is Giannis to return, be fully bought in the season, have a guy who fits alongside him, that can stretch the floor and protect the rim. That's a lot of value. And however you structure your team, whether you have Giannis playing point forward or point center or whatever, and it's you sending a message to Giannis that we scrape the bottom of the barrel. John Horst, he gave an interview to The Athletic, Eric Name, and I think what he said was, have we done enough to keep Giannis? I don't know. Have we done everything that we possibly could do? Yes, we did more than anyone else could ever have done that, which to me was an indication that number one, they didn't necessarily have Giannis sitting next to them when they did it. Even if Giannis endorsed the move, it wasn't like something that they were doing alongside him. It certainly wasn't like Luka calling Marcus Smart up multiple times.
Right.
Two, John Horst wants it on the record that they did everything that they possibly could do. I mean, that's already kind of inherent. So why? Why does he want them to know that? Well, I think because the Bucks can try to do their best here with Miles Turner and having waived Dame Lillard. But the other thing that is important here is that you can't waive and stretch somebody after what's the date, Bontemps? August 31st?
Yeah, the end of August.
So if at some point in the next year you trade Giannis and you start a rebuild, you can't really start a rebuild with Dame Lillard on your roster.
Yeah.
Because he has no trade value at the torn Achilles tendon owed $100 million. And you can't waive and stretch him in January. So you waive and stretch him now, and then you use that money to acquire an asset that you can either play or you can, if you have to, trade. And you do that so that if you have to go a rebuild route, it's the off ramp exists in a way that wouldn't exist otherwise. And you send the message that we did everything we possibly could so that the ball is in Giannis's court.
Yeah, I wouldn't say you can't start a rebuild with Dame on the roster. And I mean, you would just go about it in a different way. He would then be a giant expiring contract you could then use to maneuver things around for people.
Yeah, but then you're in the tax. Remember, they get out of the tax with this maneuver too.
Well, I understand that. Though I think they were probably going to duck the tax anyway after not re-signing Brook Lopez. But yeah, look, I understand. Like, having Miles Turner is both a way to show Giannis that you're still trying to win, and he is a guy that if they do move on from Giannis in the next year or two, there's a lot of teams he would fit on. I was just glancing through the standings, and you could probably come up with 10 different teams pretty quick that Miles Turner would be a decent fit on, and it's a reasonable contract. It's not out of bounds with what the market was going to be for him. So I do think that the Bucks could walk away with an extra asset or two. They are going to have dead money on their books for a long time, but like we've talked about before, they're not Phoenix, which is a place the free agents are in theory going to want to go. Cap space is not as much of a thing in Milwaukee, and if they move on from Giannis, they're going to be in a pretty lengthy rebuild anyway. So
Well, and they're going to be in a rough spot to rebuild because as they've continued to try to put a contender around Giannis, they've obviously given up a lot of their picks. And so, like the Damian Lillard deal, which, hey, I liked it at the time. I liked him taking that swing. The results stunk. It is what it is. There was some misfortune in that, but the simple fact is they owe a ton of money to Dame for now years to come, and they still owe picks for Dame. And that's a really, really rough spot to be in a potential rebuild. But this is what you do when you have this kind of a talent that is, the Bucks haven't had this kind of a talent since Kareem. And no matter what happens, whether Giannis spends his whole career in Milwaukee or whether he asks out tomorrow, the Giannis era in Milwaukee has been a massive success. To bring a championship to Milwaukee, to have this kind of run with a multi-time MVP has been a massive success. But the post Giannis stretch in Milwaukee is going to be painful. There's just no way around that. And you can call this a hedge against it, but it's not going to be a smooth transition, whether whether it's Giannis retiring down the road or whether it's in the near future.
Well, I'll never forget as I get older, I keep getting these sayings. If you think I'm getting too heavy on these sayings, tough. But I once had this arborist come to my house. It's one of the things you have when you're a homeowner. You have to have arborists come. And I was talking to him about planting a tree.
Oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have to do that, buddy. You don't have to.
Sometimes you do.
When you're-
Sometimes,
Some people have arborists come to their house. Let's just
well,
say
when
it.
you live in a neighborhood where if trees fall on your power lines in your house, you
Sure.
sometimes have to have
Sure.
arborists. Anyway, this arborist provided me with an important saying, and I said he says people often ask me when the best time to plant a tree is, and the answer is last year. And so this is what I say. I say, when's the best time to begin a rebuild in the NBA? Last year.
Or I hear what you're saying. Or the worst time. Like if you have Giannis Milwaukee, you run that out for as long as you can.
No, I agree. But when, independent of Giannis, when it comes time for a rebuild,
Yeah.
the first part is the hardest part. So if you can hedge, then you can then hedge.
Yeah. The Oklahoma City Thunder are the only team that I can think of that was able to have a head start on a rebuild.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just think we're being a little charitable saying it's a hedge when they have $112 million in dead money on their books. That's
well,
all.
as they're trying to figure out whether they should do that deal, that maneuver, you had to think about all angles of it. It wasn't
Sure,
something done flippantly. Okay.
of course.
I do think that on this list that we've just scratched the surface on here, the Timberwolves being in this, putting championship window closing in the putting the Timberwolves is one of the more interesting things you've done on this list. And you explained why, because they've got core players who are old and they've mortgaged their draft. But
And the biggest question there is the point guard of the future. And I agree with Bontemps. I don't know that it's Rob Dillingham.
And they made a huge bet. Tim Connolly made a huge bet on Rob Dillingham to be the long-term backcourt mate with Anthony Edwards.
I think Rob Dillingham is a lot more Lou Williams than Chris Paul. And Lou Williams had a great NBA career, quality player. But my point is, I think he's an undersized bench bucket getter, and not a run your team point guard.
well, the San Antonio Spurs, which is who they made that deal with for Dillingham, their picks have been used on 3 point guards in the last 2 drafts and 3 guards. And Dillingham is not like the other two. So that's if you had one of those two guys, Dylan Harper, Stephen Castle, you would maybe feel a little differently. Okay. The next tier on the all-in list here, teams that want or are focused on being all in on having an extended window. So the opposite of getting near the end, teams that are trying to make sure their window stays open for the longest time. The defending, I don't think I'm making a shocker here. That's what the defending champs are doing with the Thunder. But who else is on this list, Bontemps?
Yeah, the Thunder obviously are the epitome of that, as are the team that's, I think, their biggest challenger in the West this year, potentially, the Houston Rockets. Even though they just traded for Kevin Durant, they have a team built around young guys with a bunch of draft picks that can extend that window out into the future. And then it's the three teams that should be sitting atop the Eastern Conference this year, the Cavs Corner, the New York Knicks, and the Orlando Magic, all of whom have all of their core players under contract for multiple years, all of whom have cores that are somewhere in their mid to late 20s, that should have some extended window together, and frankly also benefit from the fact that they're in the Eastern Conference and there's just a cavernous vacuum at the top, particularly with Jason Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton sidelined with injuries, with their torn Achilles for this season. And that inherently gives you a lot more wiggle room to have an extended window than in the very brutally difficult Western Conference.
Yeah, so I was talking to an executive the other day, and he was saying to me, he goes, "What are the great rivalries in the game today?" And I'm like, "Boy, is this an August question?" And, you come up with some, and he's like, "Well, I know what the next great rivalry in the NBA is." And I go, "What?" I'll bite what? He goes, "The Thunder versus the CBA." Because the way that they maneuver to keep this, what'd you say, Buntos?
I don't even think that's true.
I was going to say I like Presti's odds on that one. Go
Well,
on.
I mean, they're not even going to be in the repeater tax till the new CBA comes online in 2030. So,
You're declaring it already over.
I
Is
I
what you're
just think
saying?
look, they're not in the tax. They weren't in the tax last year when they won. They're not in the tax this year when they could win again. And they have a ton of flex. Yes, they have the three guys on, Shea Alexander, Jalen Williams, Jed Holmgren on max contracts going forward. However, they have draft picks out the wazoo to have young, cheap talent around them. They have great contracts on their books otherwise. And they have flexibility on their higher priced veterans, namely Lou Dort and Isaiah Hartenstein, to maneuver their books around that way. So I don't, I think they're better set up than any other team, frankly, to deal with the CBA because they have all this young talent already.
Which is why it's a rivalry.
I, I think
Well,
I think it's
but
more for the Cavs and the Knicks and the Magic and these other teams that
Right,
are.
but none of those teams are the champs.
well,
Well,
but I agree with Bontemps in the sense of Presti and the Thunder are going to have some difficult decisions to make, but those decisions are going to be, fourth, fifth, sixth spots on the roster, not one, two, and three. And we'll see how things work out long term in terms of like, hey, is there another deal to work out with Lou Dort, with Hartenstein when those come around? But they have so many picks to be able to backload there. Like the guy they just drafted from Georgetown is a potential Isaiah Hartenstein replacement. We'll see if it comes to that.
Thomas Sharp,
Um,
center from Georgetown.
yeah, we'll see if it comes to that. Like Case and Wallace, and some of the decisions might end up being on guys that they hit on in the draft. Like, hey, if Case and Wallace keeps at the trajectory that he's on right now, he's going to be positioned for a pretty good payday. But again, they've got an MVP who's just hitting his prime, an all NBA player who's a couple years away from touching his prime, and Holmgren, a lot of people might value even more than Jalen Williams, who also hasn't touched his prime. And those guys are locked up long term with a ton of flexibility around them.
Well,
I like Presti's odds against the CBA.
of these teams that you have listed here, Bontemps, only one of them is in the second apron now, and that's the Cavs.
Right. And
That's one
the team that I am fascinated about going forward, and I'm not sure how big their window actually is Orlando. The Orlando Magic are insanely expensive already. Like they are below the first apron this year. However, with just looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 players under contract next year, they're already, according to Bobby's numbers, over $6 million over the second apron. Now, when they fill out their roster, you're talking about a team that does not pay the tax that often. Could be $40 million over the tax. Could be $45 million over the tax. Could be $50 million over the tax. I don't think that's a very long-term viable strategy in Orlando. That is when you talk about teams going up against the CBA, that's an example of a team that they just went all in on Desmond Bane. We talked about the trade at the time. I love the fit of Desmond Bane in Orlando. Let's see if Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero can take steps forward shooting wise. Let's see if Jalen Suggs can stay healthy. But that core four, if they're on the court, could be right up there with Cleveland and right up there with the Knicks in the East for sure. But is that ownership group going to spend 40, 50 million over the tax for a 4-year window? I'm not sure about that.
Well, it's also about the quality of the players. Like our big summer, at least my big summer promise going forward here is I'm going to try to talk more about percentage of the cap as opposed to the actual number. And so when you look at percentage of the cap, yeah, they're in decent shape today. But between Franz Wagner, Desmond Bane, and Jalen Suggs, they're making over 70% of the cap for those
and then
three
you have to
players.
mention the guy who's going to be making the most money.
Well, right, but his money isn't on the books yet.
Right.
But yeah, obviously next year, Paolo, I know exactly will make 25%. Well, actually, I guess he could make higher depending on whether he gets all NBA Supermax
eligibility.
But how many All-Star appearances? Between Wagner, Bane, and Suggs, do they have 2? If I think Franz made one All-Star team, did Bane make one All-Star team?
They have 0.
I don't know. I was going to say,
Didn't Franz make the All-Star team?
No,
I thought
they have 0. Those guys have zero
Okay,
together.
no, and so let me ask you this: in 5 years, how many are they going to have
Well, they've
when
got
these
a lot better
contracts are paid?
chance. They got a lot better chance in the East.
Well,
Bain's
fair
chance
enough.
to
But my
become an
point is,
all-star. Yeah, but yeah, there may be
that's
all-star type of guys.
70% of your cap. Those three guys. Now, Paolo, that's a guy who is presenting as a guy who could be a multi-time all-star. But you got 70% of your cap tied up in three guys who are good players. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But let's look at the 70% of the cap that the Thunder have. I mean, granted that's a high bar, but
But that's the bar if you're going to be a second apron team.
well,
Yeah, and I had the numbers a little bit backwards. They're a couple million below the second apron. I was looking at the two lines wrong on the sheet, but they're still a team that's going to be on pace to be 30 million over the tax next year. And again, how long are they going to be willing to spend that kind of money to have four big contracts on the books? When Jalen Suggs is on a descending deal, I think that's going to end up looking pretty good. But you know, that I think is where you're going to see a lot of questions with whether it's the Cavs or the Magic or even the Knicks. Like these
Mhm.
teams are consistently in the tax, bumping up against the second apron, whether they get into it or not. The one thing that we haven't really touched on much in the CBA is that the repeater tax penalties are a lot stronger now than they used to be. And for all the talk about taking away tools from teams, it's a hell of a lot more expensive for teams to be way over the tax now, especially if they get to the repeater, than it used to be. And that, I think, more than anything, is going to cause teams to have to retrench on spending. So,
and that's one of the reasons you're going to have the Boston Celtics, who just made a move in this week to offload friend of the pod George Niang's salary. The Celtics are really focused on getting under the tax. Yes, they don't want to outlay the money, but if they're going to have this gap year, it's so important for them to help reset the repeater march, because
they're already a repeater tax team.
right, it's difficult. And so, by the way, just to compare the Cavs, who are a second apron team, if you look at Mobley, Mitchell, and Garland, all of them, their contracts are all on the books. That's about 85% of the tax. I'm sorry, of the cap.
Yeah.
So, like Donovan Mitchell's a first team All NBA player, Evan Mobley's defensive player of the year, second team All NBA player, Garland's a multi-time All-Star.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's, Wade, LeBron, Bosh, but if the Magic are trying to beat them, that's a team they're trying to beat. And so as you calculate going forward, I mean, and health plays a role. You can't always predict that, but anyway.
Well, the Magic made a big bet on Desmond Bain, both in what they gave up, the picks package, including, or highlighted by the Suns pick in next year's draft, and financially. And they need that bet to pay major dividends, or there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. I do want to hit real quick, though, on the Rockets and that, because the Rockets to me are a fascinating they've created a fascinating situation. But I agree. I think they're as well positioned to have a long run as any franchise other than Oklahoma City, despite the fact that they just went all in. Or not, they didn't go all in. They just made a trade to get Kevin Durant, what's he going into, year 18, year 17, 18?
By the way, it's August 6th as we're recording this, and Kevin Durant does not have a contract extension.
So that's where I was headed.
Okay.
They did not go all in on the trade. They made a trade at a price that they were okay with, that did not sacrifice the long term. Jalen Green was a second round pick that didn't really pan out. We talked when they made the trade. If you're ranking the young players on the roster by future value, by long term value, he might have been fifth or sixth on that list. And then they didn't really have like an immediate spot for the 10th overall pick in this year's draft. Hell, they couldn't squeeze the third overall pick in last year's draft into the rotation. The Rockets aren't going to go all in by all appearances, and by what I've heard, they're not going all in on an extension for Kevin Durant. Now, doesn't mean it won't happen, but there've been rumblings of, hey, KD doesn't, he's not going to push for the full max. I don't know that the Rockets are going to put anything on the table that's close to the max. I think the Rockets are like it's not ideal, but I don't think they would panic if they go into the season with Kevin Durant just on the contract that he's on, just on the expiring deal.
Well,
So
this is one of the things I talked about when Durant was on the market about whether a team looked at Durant as a expire would be comfortable with him on an expiring contract or felt that they needed to give him a 2-year, 110 to 120 million dollar extension, and that was going to affect what teams would pay for him. And as you said, and I'll say this: Rafael Stone, since he's been the GM of the Rockets, he signed quite a few giant contracts, but most of them have been short. Like Jalen Green's contract was shorter, and Fred VanVleet has signed 2 short contracts. Even this contract they signed with Dorian Finney-Smith, it's only 2 years guaranteed.
the Şengün was well south of max.
Well, and the 2 long contracts he's given out, which are Alperen Şengün and Jabari Smith Jr., were both contracts that, now we'll see everybody's health goes and everything, were 2 contracts that the league viewed as good value contracts.
Yeah.
Yes. Rafael Stone has done an outstanding job, and the Rockets as a whole have done an outstanding job of understanding the new economic environment the league is in. And we've talked about it a lot. Teams have to be much better about negotiating every dollar on deals. And you look at what the Rockets have done, they have done a great job. Frankly, the only deal that wasn't like that was the Jalen Green deal, which they got to get out of jail free card on the Kevin Durant trade. But all these other trades that they've done, or all these other deals that they've done, you keep talking about percentage of the cap, Brian. Alperen Şengün is 18% of the cap. He just made an all-star team last year. Fred VanVleet, 16% of the cap. Jabari Smith Jr., his contract starts out his extension under 15% of the cap and goes down from there every year. So those are all good, solid, long-term contracts. And as MacMahon said, when you have all these young players and you're trying to have this depth going forward, which is we've seen over the past couple of years, deeper teams are probably going to have more success with where the league is headed. You have to mind your P's and Q's when it comes to these contracts and not be giving out extra money on deals where you wind up in the second apron sooner and you have all these difficult financial questions facing you sooner. And it's why these Kevin Durant negotiations are very interesting. And I'm very curious to see where they land as whether A, he gets an extension done at all, and B, if he does get an extension done, what the number is. Because if you look at what the Rockets' history is, history would tell you it's not going to be 2 years for the max number. It's going to be something a decent way south of that.
Also, actions over words. Watch the way the Rockets have handled their business this summer. They have handled their business this summer to maximize cap space in 2027. So you look at Fred VanVleet's contract. He has a player option, but he's up in 27. Now maybe he does another deal in a year from now and they reevaluate, but he is off the books in 27. Dorian Finney-Smith, non-guaranteed in 27. Bontemps, you mentioned Jabari Smith Jr. Contract dips in 27, then goes back up in 28, dips down. I think they did the same thing with Steven Adams. Contract starts at a certain number, dips down in 27.
His contract is descending right from the beginning.
Let's see what happens with Tari Eason, whether they get a deal done with him. But I'm looking at this, and I'll make a wager right now that it wouldn't surprise me if a deal Tari Eason signs dips in 27. And the reason I say that, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Durant, if he does an extension, he can sign for 2 years, but that second year will be 27, 28. The Rockets' actions indicate they're protecting space in 27. I don't know. They've got to have their reason why, and maybe it's a hedge on something else and it won't matter in a year. But keep that in mind as you think about what they're going to do with Durant. If they've done 4 or 5 contracts that prioritize dipping their space and creating maneuverability in 27, I don't think you should assume that Durant's going to have a giant number in 27, 28 on the table.
The only thing to add there, though, is that while all that is true, there's a certain guy who's going to be coming online with a new contract in the summer of 2027 that we
Amen Thompson.
Good, and Amen Thompson, who I suspect if he's not making the max, I suspect he's going to be awfully close to the max, and that is going to eat a heavy chunk into any potential space that Houston will have from a contractual standpoint that summer. But yes, the Rockets have done a remarkable job of showing fiscal discipline and restraint all the way through. And I think if they can continue to do that, they're going to have a real advantage over the competition because we've seen other teams not do that. And I think it's going to bite them later. And if you do that, like Houston has, and like Oklahoma City has to some extent too, with the way they have their books set up, it's going to really pay off for you down the road in terms of managing your money in this new environment we're in.
Yeah, fiscal discipline and an asset discipline as well. They're still loaded on
Mm-hmm.
pick.
Yeah, and like, look, a big trade could come to the fore in the next, 6 to 9 months, and they could go all in on that trade, and their maneuverability for 27 could be moot because they may have another player on that books. But they certainly, at least before that would happen, have made these decisions this way. All right, the next tier, all in on building around young cores, Bontemps.
Yeah, 5 teams here. Atlanta, and a couple of them kind of interesting, I would say. Atlanta and Detroit in the East. Obviously, San Antonio out west of Victor Wembanyama, and then the other two, the Memphis Grizzlies and the Portland Trailblazers.
Atlanta's interesting, in part because as you're discussing their young core, you did not include Trae Young.
It's not that young.
Well, what is he, 26 now, I believe? 26, 27?
Either way, I mean, yeah, look, I would say that's
He is 26, turning 27 in September.
there you go.
All right.
I would say Trae Young is a classic actions over words situation. He's got 1 year left on his contract before he can be a free agent. He has not signed an extension yet. And like we talked about the other day with De'Aaron Fox, I don't think there's a huge market for point guards around the league, trade wise, in sort of that tier of player. And I think the way that the Hawks have set up their team, they've sort of set up an ensemble cast around Trae Young where they don't really have a replacement for Trae Young to run their offense, but there's also not a clear home for Trae Young to go elsewhere as a free agent. I would compare him in some ways to Julius Randle's situation in Minnesota this past year. And he ended up getting a new deal done this summer at about the number he was at. I'll be curious to see if an extension gets done with Trae Young or what happens there. But I think if you look at where the Hawks are headed, it's with a team that's built around Jalen Johnson, last year's number 1 overall pick, Zachary Richeche, and then the potential juicy pick they could have next year from the New Orleans Pelicans, which certainly if you talk to people in the league who run numbers, that's got a really good chance of being a top 5 or 6 pick in what is a loaded top of next year's draft. And if they end up with a Nate Ament, Darren Peterson, a AJ DeBansa, Cameron Boozer to go with these other guys,
Yeah.
that's a pretty awfully interesting situation. But yeah, the Trae Young component of Atlanta's future going forward is going to be really interesting to monitor because if I was Atlanta, I would be offering Trae sort of a deal like what Rudy Gobert got done with Minnesota. Take a bit of money off what you're making now, get some more years, lock yourself in with the Hawks, guarantee yourself you're going to get your number retired in the future. Best player they've had since Dominique. And we've got a team with an ensemble cast around you that's got a chance to be a real force in the East with you on it. But we can't do it with you on a max. So it'll be interesting to see how that conversation goes.
I think it's going to be hard to convince Trae Young. And listen, we understand the limitations or the flaws, but I think it's going to be hard to convince Trae Young with his offensive production that he doesn't merit a max deal. So, I think that I don't disagree with what you're saying. I don't disagree with the implication that Trae Young is not that everything is not revolving around Trae Young in Atlanta anymore. I just think it's an interesting thing to point out.
It's interesting you have the Blazers on this list. I want to talk about the Blazers real quick.
I would say that was more of a Kevin Pelton choice to put them in this tier than me.
He just shoved him right out front there.
No, it's
MacMahon.
just the truth.
What he's saying is that's specific Northwest homerism.
It just
we had discussions that went different ways. I pushed for Minnesota to be in the first tier, and Kevin, I would say, push for Portland to be in this tier as example.
Right. Well, just like this is a team that has Jeremy Grant on a giant untradeable contract, and just traded for Drew Holiday and his $100 million, and signed Dame Lillard. So it's hard to
Lillard. Yeah.
To a literally untradeable contract.
That's right.
To a no trade clause contract.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that ends up being a good value contract that he comes back and is an all-star again at the
well,
mid-level,
if it is, then it's basically a 1-year deal, 1 year that he plays deal, because he also has a player option.
That, I mean, we don't need to go over it again, but the setup that Dame Lillard got, the torn Achilles was horrendous, and everything that's happened since, not that it makes up for it, everything that's happened since has been amazing for him, and including that's
that contract and the extra money he's getting. Yeah. I mean, and look, and Portland is in a really interesting spot. They obviously bought out DeAndre Ayton this summer to clear a pathway for playing time for both Donovan Clingan, who they drafted in the lottery last year, and Jan Hansen, who they drafted 16th this year. They clearly have a lot of faith in him as a player long term. They have Shaden Sharp and Scoot Henderson in the backcourt. I'm curious to see if both of them are starting or not, and what the futures for those guys are. Obviously, you just mentioned they traded for Drew Holiday this summer. They clearly have visions of him playing a big role. They still have Jeremy Grant. They've got Denny Avia, who's taken some really nice strides forward for them. He's on a great long-term deal. I do think they're kind of caught in between more than I would have them in this tier, but the argument is you've got Scoot Henderson, you've got Shaden Sharp, you've got the two bigs. They've leaned into that as the core of their team going forward. Denny Avia is a young guy still.
Toumani Camara, I think.
And Toumani Camara is the other guy, obviously. Yeah. Yes, he deserves to be in that conversation too.
And what is Scoot Henderson? What is Shaden Sharp are huge, huge question marks. Obviously, like, there is major upside there, but the discussion there is about potential. It's not about production or anything that's proven to this point.
As for the Grizzlies, you've got Ja and Jaren Jackson in their young core. Are you including Santi Aldama and Zach Edey? Is that part of the core, or
I mean, I would say the core of that team, if you just look at it from the way they've allocated assets, it's the two stars, John Jaren. It's Zach Edey, who they drafted 9th, and it's Cedric Coward, who they drafted 11th and traded up to get. Like, that's, and then you've got Jalen Wells too, who they like a lot. And obviously they moved Desmond Bane thinking that Jalen Wells can step into his spot in the starting lineup.
Cam Spencer.
They also signed Cam Spencer this summer. I mean, they've, under Zach Kleiman, they've done a nice job of churning out a lot of useful players from, got Scottie Pippen Jr., found him on the scrap heap, turned into a really good player. Like, they've done a really good job of generating depth over the past several years, but they made a big swing on Cedric Coward in the draft. The guy who only played a few games last year in college, came out, was the big late riser in the lottery. He's the prototypical wing size player. It's the kind of guy that Memphis.
Yeah, he's their Desmond Bane replacement.
Well, I mean, they would probably argue more.
Jalen Wells. Yeah, Jalen Wells is also a major part of their young core, and he's the guy who is going to be in the starting. I mean, he took Marcus Smart's starting job last year, but I think they look at him as, and Coward is a similar prospect, right? Completely off the radar, a D3 guy. I mean, Wells was D2, who, transferred, I think both to Washington State, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a lot about, the 3 and D. Coward's, I think, longer, a little bit more athletic, but that type of guy. And then, you guys mentioned this here, but also if you're talking about the Grizzlies' young core, they will be making a significant addition to that in next year's draft with the Suns pick.
We'll see. Maybe the Suns will be better than everybody thinks. You also put the Detroit
Suns in the West playoff picture.
I'm just trying to. you also have the Pistons on here, this actually be a really interesting season for the Pistons because they took the big giant step last year. Where do they find their more improvement? They had a really, they had a competitive series with the Knicks in that first round. Who knows if Jalen Brunson doesn't hit that one shot where he just stuck his leg in the ground, one of the great moves the whole playoffs, where he pivoted and hit that shot, just dropping the dagger in Detroit.
After Asar Thompson had been shutting him down for
Oh man,
a few minutes.
yeah. So they get Jaden Ivey back from that injury. But definitely their young core, obviously Cade Cunningham, who hit the Supermax, Jaden Ivey and Asar Thompson. Ron Holland, a guy that they drafted in the top 5 a year ago, who didn't have a really impactful rookie year. They're hoping he takes a step forward. He would have to be, I'm sure, included in that.
Jalen Duren, a guy who,
yeah, Duren is really young. Yeah,
he's been around a while, but he turns 23 right around the start of the regular season. I'm sorry, 22 right around the start of the regular season.
Right. So that's Detroit's a team to pay attention to this year for various reasons. We'll see when the schedule comes out, but it would not surprise me if they have some made-for-TV matchups where they get a little bit more attention this year because of what they did last year. We've talked about the Spurs a lot. Okay, the next tier, Bontemps, you have all in on 2 timelines, and this is I think I like this one maybe the most out of all of these. And you've got a bunch of teams you think have 2 timelines with good reason.
Yeah, that was Pelton's idea for
that makes more sense.
Group them together, and obviously a bunch of star power teams here, and the 2 timelines are for, obviously it's you go back, the Golden State Warriors are in this tier, and you go back to the whole light years ahead with the lottery picks thing, but it's 2 timelines for a lot of different reasons. So
yeah, I mean they don't want to hear their name mentioned with 2 timelines again. They tried to retire that.
That's right. But the teams as a whole are Golden State, the 2 LA teams, the Clippers and Lakers, Miami, Dallas, and Philadelphia.
Dallas sort of fell ass backwards into 2 timelines on lottery night.
You know what, though? The 2 timelines thing with Dallas really is fascinating, though, because obviously in a lot of ways, from a business perspective and just from like, hey, what the hell's the future after this, by Nico's words, 3 to 4 year window that you created, the Cooper Flag stroke of lottery luck bailed the Mavericks out. Now, having said that, it's going to be very interesting to see kind of how long is it before the transition happens that this is Cooper Flag's franchise. Kind of how does that go? It's AD's franchise right now. When Kyrie comes back, it'll be AD and Kyrie's, with Cooper Flag as kind of the primary marketing interest. But at a certain point, it'll be his franchise. And then there's going to be major challenges building long-term around him because of the picks and the swaps that they gave up to successfully build a contender around Luka. I mean, when you think about, typically you get a generational talent at number 1 overall, and there's going to be a couple more cracks at the early lottery, right? Like, look at San Antonio. I mean, you get Wemby, you get Stephon Castle. They kind of lucked into Dylan Harper, but they got a few cracks early lottery. Derek Lively II is a early lottery type of talent, but he's probably going to be the only other young piece that is kind of on that same timeline with Cooper Flag. They have this year's pick, and then 27 to 30, it's either they don't have the pick or it's a swap. And it's going to be, it's a swap with the Thunder in 28, swap with the Spurs, who I think will be pretty damn good by 30. And so there's not going to be a lot of young talent being added to the mix as Cooper Flag is, getting into his early 20s.
Yeah. So also on this list, the 2 LA teams, but the Lakers clearly, set up around 26-year-old Luka Doncic. Is he 27 or 26?
He turns 27 in February, 26.
Okay, so he's 26 now. Obviously, especially with the comments that Rob Pelinka made, around signing him, rightfully so. But then they've got this team this year with 41-year-old LeBron, who is coming off of a All NBA season.
I was going to say a 41-year-old All NBA,
right.
selection, LeBron James.
But you wrote in here, Bontemps, about the Austin Reaves situation, and Austin Reaves is sort of straddling the timelines here because he definitely was a player who thrived, maybe not always with LeBron on the court, but certainly with the LeBron formatted team. That when they went to the conference finals, Austin Reaves was a big role in that, and he remains a big role in the team. But he's lined more in age with Luka, and he's going into the final year of his contract. He's got an opt-out after this year, which he's almost certainly going to take. And you talked in here about what a contract for him might look like. And so here's my question to you, Bontemps. And this may be a question the Lakers have to answer. Which timeline is Austin Reaves in? Not necessarily with his age, but does he represent, because they're going to have to make a decision here. They're going to have to make a decision about whether they're going to pay Austin Reaves. You quote league executives here saying this guy's getting over $30 million a year. I don't disagree. The Austin Reaves portion of this is an interesting thing that's going to develop over this next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, to be clear, that was in a story I did with Bobby Marks and
about the Lakers. That's right.
I'm sorry. About the Lakers. It also ran on Wednesday. But yeah, no, look, I think the Austin Reaves, there's been a lot of talk about what is going to happen with LeBron James when he becomes a free agent next summer. But I think there's two very fascinating potential free agents in Los Angeles, because we've talked about Austin Reaves before. He's right now on a deal that is below market for him. He's making, in the final year of his deal this year, $13.9 million. He's got a player option for $14.8 million. He will not be playing on that player option next year. He will be a free agent. And he will be looking for a very big payday. I don't remember if you said the number when you were running through that or not, but I talked to a few people around the league gauging what his market would be, and the belief is $30 million a year or more. And if you're paying Austin Reaves,
he probably wants or more. He's probably looking for the or more side of that.
I feel like I could say with pretty good clarity that he would think more than that. And look, you can make an argument that LeBron and Austin will be the two best free agents on the market next summer. There's a debate about.
Well, it depends on whether Trae Young or Kevin Durant extend.
Well, but I mean, look, he's he's going to be 28 years old, but he's a big guard. He's 6'5". There's, he could potentially be the lead guard on your offense for you. Like there are people who are big fans of Austin. That being said, if you look around the league, the combo guards who are one position defenders, which I would say Austin Reaves is one.
He defends a position.
Well, he's a shooting guard. He's like Tyler Hero. He's like Anthony Simons. He's like a lot of these guys who are very talented players who there has not been a great market for in terms of asset return and trades. And they're probably the most replaceable player type in the league. So is he good enough to be the Jalen Brunson or the Kyrie Irving next to Luka Doncic long term? If he is, I think the Lakers can feel comfortable giving him that kind of number and having those two guys be your creators going forward. If he's not, then I think it's a real question you have to ask yourself if you're the Lakers about, is that the right piece that you're going to build with him going forward? Because for all the talk about LeBron, whatever is going to happen with his future, the Austin Reaves question could be the one that has a much bigger bearing on the championship ceiling and window of the Lakers over the next few years, because you're not signing him to a 1 or 2 year deal. He's getting a long-term deal at a big number. And then you have him and Luka, and then you're building around him and Luka, assuming that he stays there. So I do think that subplot throughout the season is going to be very interesting to watch, particularly after he really struggled in the Minnesota series. And as you guys both know, for all the attention on the Lakers this year and all the focus on Luka's future and everything else, how Austin Reaves plays this season, and particularly assuming they get to the playoffs, how he plays in the playoffs is going to be an awfully interesting story to follow. And it's going to potentially have a big bearing on the Lakers next summer and their seasons beyond that, depending on what they decide to do.
Yeah, he struggled against the Timberwolves. In his defense, he did have a really good playoff run when they went to the Western Conference Finals a couple of years ago. So, it's not like we've never seen this guy play well in the playoffs. You bring up Brunson, and some similarities here, some major differences. One being that at this time that summer, the Mavericks could have gotten Brunson locked up to a contract that would have averaged 14 million a year, but once it got past that point, once it got into January and Brunson gave him a last chance and then he kept playing better and it was like, oh, okay, hold on, I've outplayed that number. The Mavericks had a decision to make, and that was trade him before that deadline, get value for him, or take your chances of losing him for nothing that summer. And the Lakers are already on that. They're in that situation now where their options are either take a chance of losing Reaves for nothing next summer, or be willing to pay whatever it takes to keep him. They do have the advantage of, I'm sure Austin Reaves would love to continue playing for the Lakers. Or like if you don't want to pay what it's going to take to keep him, do you trade him midway through this season and try to get value?
You also have the Clippers on here. The Clippers, well, as is well known, have a whole bunch of guys in their mid to late 30s on their roster. They also have one guy on their roster right now who's under contract past next season. That's Ivica Zubac. After
Past
that,
27 season, to be clear, you're saying.
After next season. Oh, you're saying this? Yeah, yes.
After the 26-27 season.
Their future books are completely clear. And he's talking about two timelines. They got all these guys on this roster, from 34-year-old Kawhi to 40-year-old Chris Paul, and Brook Lopez is like 37, and Batum is like 37, 38, and John Collins is still in his 20s, I'm pretty sure, but James Harden is, I think, 36. So they got this super veteran team now, but totally clean books, and they've worked, in their, they held the line a little bit with Kawhi on his extension. They've held the line on Harden's contracts. They've given him flexibility to opt out, but kept him short. When they acquired John Collins for Norm Powell, they did that to keep some flexibility in part. So they're sort of the epitome of two timelines, for sure. And then you've got the 76ers on here, Bontemps, and I don't think this is by plan. I think it's by reality of the health of their highest paid players. I'm not sure how those guys are going to hold up.
Yeah, I mean, they're a lot like Dallas. You've got a young top five. I mean, obviously Cooper's a different level of prospect than VJ Edgecombe, but they got the third pick in the draft. They have VJ Edgecombe. They have Tyrese Maxey. They have Jared McCain. I thought getting Jabari Walker on a two-way this summer was nice. Like, they have some good and interesting young players on their roster. And then they've got Paul George and Joel Embiid, the two giant question marks in terms of their health, in terms of their ability to play at the level required for this team to be really good. And, that's why they fit in this group. You could put them in a couple of different buckets if you wanted to. They're another team that's hard to put somewhere. In Miami, just because
70% of the cap, by the way, with those two guys, George and Embiid.
And Miami, since we kind of glossed over them, they're another one of these teams that has a bunch of cap space in the next year or two and has an okay roster now. Obviously, they make the Norm Powell deal this summer, basically get him for free. They should be more of a factor in the East this year than they were the last couple of years. But, they've had some designs on trying to upgrade their roster money-wise, and they're going to have some money to spend in the next couple seasons too.
Well, an interesting thing for the Heat, do they extend Norman Powell? The same question that the Clippers had to deal with. And if, do they extend Tyler Hero? And if they do, at what number? Which would, maybe clarify.
Both of those guys, I would say, fall into the same exact bucket that Austin Reaves is in also. Two more combo guards who are good players, where there's not a voluminous market for them in the trade market, which is why Norm Powell was acquired coming off the best year of his career by the Heat for Kyle Anderson, Kevin Love in his second.
Yeah.
All right. Your next tier here is all in on gap years. And you've actually got two teams that are all in on gap years here.
Yeah, this one was the easiest one on the whole list. You got Boston and Indiana. Obviously, no Jason Tatum, no Tyrese Halliburton. The Celtics lose Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis by a trade, as they, I believe, will get out of the tax by the time we get to the end of the season. and reset their repeater clock. They're only, I think, 10 or 12 million over the tax now. I think they'll get out of it one way or the other. And then Indiana loses Miles Turner. Whether they were surprised by the Bucks coming in like everyone else was or not,
They were. I think
line-
Kevin Pritchard's been on the
Yeah.
on the
no, I
record.
know. But my point is, we talked all spring about were the Pacers actually going to be willing to pay the luxury tax, something they never do. And for all of the bluster they had about paying the tax, they are not paying the tax. And you could say they're not doing it because Tyrese Halliburton is hurt. That's fine. But their team was built around an ensemble cast, and Miles Turner was a big part of that. Miles Turner left, and they've replaced him with Isaiah Jackson, who also tore his Achilles and is on a 3-year deal with non-guarantees in the out years. And they traded for Jay Huff from Memphis. So both of these teams look like they're preparing more for the fall of 2026 rather than trying to be as competitive as they can in 2025.
Yeah, Achilles tears created tears that put them in this tier.
The next one is you've got all in on quote draft positioning.
The tankers.
Also very simple. Brooklyn, Charlotte, Washington, and Utah. I don't think we need to say much more than that.
Okay, I will say this. I've got Charlotte fans in my life who believe that the Hornets can move this year.
Move what?
Move up.
Well,
And-
look, if Charlotte wants to be competitive in the East this year, and if LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller are healthy, sure, I think you can make an argument, certainly, that Charlotte could get into the play-in mix and have a chance to make the playoffs. I would also say, again, from an actions over words situation, that the current centers on the Charlotte Hornets roster are Mason Plumlee, Ryan Kalkbrenner, and the guy who might be their starter, Moussa Diabate. Like, that is not a center rotation of a team that I think is really aggressively trying to move up the standings this year. I think Charlotte would love to get a crack at Darren Peterson, Nate Ament, AJ DeBansa, Cameron Boozer, one of these guys, and then put their foot down and start to really rev things up.
Yeah, I think if you're a Hornets fan, what you're looking for this year is you want Con Knippel to have a chance to win the Rookie of the Year. You want to see him be putting up big numbers. You want to see him playing alongside Brandon Miller and trying to figure out a way to get the three of them with LaMelo efficient in a way that doesn't make your stomach turn like sometimes happens the way they played offense last year. And if those three guys look like you've got something going, then you can be excited about it, whether you finish 11th or whether you finish, ninth.
Let's see LaMelo Ball play.
That's fair.
LaMelo Ball played more than 51 games.
It's just interesting. You don't have them under and I don't want to spend too much time belaboring the point, but we're going to throw the Hornets fans a bone here, but you don't have them on, devoted to their young tiers here like you had with these other teams. And, LaMelo is also up for an extension.
I was going to say, I think the biggest question about Charlotte's future is whether LaMelo Ball will be part of it.
LaMelo's still a year away from extension talk. He's still got 3 more years on his deal after this year. But they've got, since he played 51 games as a rookie, he played 75 games his second year. The last 3 years, he's played 36, 22, and 47. Like, whatever other questions you want to have about LaMelo's game, let's see him play 65 or 70 games. Let's see him qualify for end of season awards. Let's see him be healthy and productive for a full season. But yeah, look, like these guys drafted Tijan Sloan. He's got a lot of time to grow still. Brandon Miller had surgery last year, missed a bunch of time. Let's see him come back and play. You mentioned Khan. Let's see what he can do. Brandon Miller only played 27 games last year for them. Like, let's see their young guys on the court and playing, and we'll see where they land. But my guess is this is another lottery.
They're energized
bound.
by their summer league championship. Okay. In the last tier, you have all in.
Still two.
And this is
two of them.
What?
He's got 2 more tiers.
2 more tiers.
Skipped it.
Oh, there's a single team tier that I didn't even see.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we'll get to there. That's just a little tease. All
Sure.
right, all in on. Ooh, this is a harsh one.
These last two are both harsh.
All in
These are
on
USWB
nothing.
tiers if I've ever seen them.
Yeah, this was not Pelton. All in on nothing. I got nothing for you. Go ahead.
Nuffin, nothing.
Yeah, Bowden actually did come up with the term for the final tier because I would have originally had that team in.
If your fans, the fans, we'll see how many of them have done the powers of deduction.
Well, the four teams in this group are Charlotte, Sacramento, New
Not Charlotte,
Orleans, not Charlotte,
Chicago.
sorry, Chicago, New Orleans, Sacramento, and Toronto.
Well, I certainly agree with the Bulls. They've been all in on nothing for a while.
I think the Pelicans would try to argue they're all in on their young core, including the two guys that they drafted in the first round this year in the lottery this year. But boy, was that just a befuddling trade to give up a likely higher pick in next year's draft to move up 10 spots.
Well, they're also one of the Achilles teams. Their Achilles injury
Yeah.
with DeJounte Murray happened a while ago.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get grouped in with the three unfortunate ones we saw in the postseason. But
Well, and they weren't a playoff team.
Yeah.
right.
They're just
right.
they're just sort of whipsawing all over the place, and
Ooh, a whipsaw.
it's hard to really get a sense of what the overall plan is with the new regime led by Joe Dumars and Charlie Weaver.
I would also say there's an unclear plan in Sacramento.
And real quick on New Orleans, again, there's still hey, like, what's up with Zion? Is this a guy you're building around? Is this a guy you can get value for?
Well, there remains off-court stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, there's not a lot of clarity in general there. Yeah, I mean, look, Sacramento a few years ago had Tyrese Halliburton and De'Aaron Fox, and then you have exit interviews back in April, and Domantas Sabonis is saying, "Yeah, we need a point guard on the team."
And they got
And they basically
Westbrook's still out
Dennis
there.
Schroeder.
right,
Russ,
and
Russ is still out there.
Russ is still out there. They've basically recreated the Bulls from a couple years ago with Domantas Sabonis,
who are also in.
Yeah. Well, yes, they've as Domantas Sabonis as in the Nick Vucevic spot alongside DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. Like it, I thought they did fine on the De'Aaron Fox trade when Fox wanted out to get the assets they did for Fox at the time. But yeah, it's just from where these guys were a couple years ago. They fire Mike Brown, they fire Monty McNair. They've blown things half up, and they're kind of stuck in no man's land where they're not really rebuilding, and they're also not really good enough to be a playoff team. So
the Raptors fans would be annoyed that they're here. You know that those fine folks in Toronto are a little sensitive. They would be a little annoyed saying, well, here comes Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick had a good finish to last year, and Scotty Barnes, this is when he ascends. And
yeah, I mean Toronto is kind of in the same spot where like they make this Brandon Ingram trade. I mean, they essentially turn Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, and OG Anunoby into RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and Brandon Ingram. Like when you look at the sum total of their moves, I'm not a huge fan of that. They gave Jakob Poeltl an odd extension, I thought, this summer. They have some interesting young guys. Grady Dick had an interesting year last year. Jacoby Walter has some potential. Colin Murray Boyles, the guy they took with the 9th pick in this year's draft, super interesting defensive prospect. He's got a chance to be an all.
Hey, Jamal Shed was a revelation down the stretch last year.
I really like Jamal Shed. He's going to be a long-term, really good backup point guard, I think, in the NBA, like a long-term rotation player. But again, like they're in the tax with a team that, like, are they out of the play-in the East? Maybe.
Like in the play-in?
Well, they're definitely one of the 10 best teams in the East.
Well, this is the thing. I would almost say they're all in on the play-in. Like that, like
right.
I mean, maybe that would it's the same thing as saying all in on nothing. But I think they're all in on the play-in.
Yeah, it's just hard to really pin down again, like what the overall vision is. Like and maybe this is, I mean, obviously Masai left this summer. He had an incredible run in Toronto, but if you go back a couple of years ago when they didn't re-sign Fred VanVleet and they made these trades, the idea was you bottom out and come back up. And last year they didn't keep their pick, ended up being the pick that became Rob Dillingham. as part of a prior trade to bring Jakob Poeltl back to Toronto. Don't like the value on that. This year they end up with the ninth pick. Again, get a player I think's got a chance to be a really good player in Colin Murray Boyles, but it's just felt like they've kind of been straddling rebuilding and trying to get back in the playoffs for the past couple of years, and I'm not thrilled about where it left them.
You said with certainty that they're a top 10 team in the East. They're better than Washington. They're better than Brooklyn. I'll
Yeah,
give you Charlotte.
yeah.
Who else are they with absolute certainty better than?
Uh, they're better than Chicago, I would say for sure. Let me look at the standings.
I don't know if that's a certainty, but okay.
I would
Philly
say
finished beneath them last year.
I would say they're better than Chicago. I think there's a decent chance if Philly has injuries, I think there's a decent chance they're better than Philly. I think they could be better than Boston potentially this year because I think the Celtics could really struggle.
Boston and Indy.
Indy is another one you could have questions about. Like I think Toronto's floor, I think, is fairly high because they have a bunch of solid players.
I think their floor is 12th.
Well, I think their floor is higher than that. But
Okay.
my point is, the ceiling is not very high. And if like coming out the other side of a rebuild, in theory, they're on the other side of the rebuild now. Like this is their team. This is why they're in this tier because we're talking about them. And as Brian said, you could argue they're all in on the play-in. I would say that's sort of the same kind of thing
Yeah.
Sacramento is in. They're Sacramento of the East, I would say, is the simplest way to put it.
Ooh,
Ouch.
that's never something you
Well,
Toronto's a
look,
much nicer
the one difference,
city.
You don't want to hear, however you finish that sentence. You're the
Sacramento
Sacramento
of the
of,
the
like
one
nothing.
difference
you
is
know,
the one difference there that is worth pointing out is Scotty Barnes has a chance to be really, really good. And if he does take a big step forward and becomes an all NBA forward, a true all NBA forward this year, like what Cade Cunningham did last year, for example, um, this conversation looks different if he's a top 15 player in the league. And we'll see if
Well,
he
but
can
but
make
but
that
what
kind of
happened
jump.
before Cade Cunningham had his big breakout season? They went out and surrounded him with shooting.
Yes. And
You
Toronto has
know, and
only not added shooting to this team.
yeah, they put him in a situation where he had a chance to succeed. And I don't think that's happened with Scotty Barnes.
Yeah.
all right.
The final tier.
I didn't see this when I read the story.
You got to keep scrolling.
I guess so. All in on 2024.
Oof.
By the way, it's 2025.
Another way to put this, when all in goes wrong.
Yeah. Phoenix Suns, obviously in this tier. Uh, we've talked a lot about the Suns and their decision making. I think as MacMahon just said it very well. When all in goes wrong, the Suns are a good example of that. From the Bradley Beal buyout to the failed Kevin Durant trade to, I mean, you could even argue maybe long down the road the Devin Booker extension. Um, they're it's going to be a rough few years ahead in Phoenix, most likely.
Well, their fans would say that Brian Gregory did a good job of bringing in, size and focusing on defense, and that they were really able to improve their depth and acquiring the lottery pick. Come on, Maluach, gives them something they haven't had in a while, which is a young player to build around. They
Their
would
fans
probably
would
push
say this, or
back.
their front office would say this.
Well,
You know what I
I
think their
guess
fans would
that's a
say?
fair point.
Their fans would say, "Hey, thank goodness that Ishbia slashed beer prices."
They turned Kevin Durant into Jalen Green. I would say that would be my rejoinder.
Well, you got no. Hold on. Now I'm going to call you on that. You got to see what Maluach becomes.
Dylan Brooks is a solid role player.
Yes, no, I agree. They got some, but I'm just saying, like, I don't think the trade was a mistake. But
that trade.
No, right, that trade, the
Yeah.
latter trade. I'm just saying though that that is the situation that the Suns put themselves in, where the best trade they could make was to get what you could charitably call a very distressed asset,
Oh yeah.
a solid role player, and the 10th pick in the draft for Kevin Durant.
Well, the simple fact of the matter is this: the Rockets gave you back your own pick and they still have two in their pocket.
Yeah.
So, and like when we're
And Kevin
discussing,
Durant.
yes, and when we're right, and when we're discussing like the Grizzlies, you bring up the 26 Suns pick. Like having Suns picks is one of the most valuable assets for multiple teams around the league. So,
Well, and even too, like for example, um the Mark Williams trade that Phoenix made. Um, Mark Williams is an interesting young player. Like we talked about in February, he's a flawed player, both from a game style of play and from an injury standpoint. And they don't have very many first round picks to trade, and they traded two of them to get him after they drafted
well,
Kaman
Well,
Malawi,
one of them was the
10th pick.
29th pick in this draft, but yes,
I'm
okay.
just saying, but listen, they drafted the Hornets got Liam McNeely with that pick, who was going into the draft a top 20 pick, and is a guy who could be a really good shooter long term, which like these guys could use. Like I just
yeah.
again like from some of their asset management stuff like that, like you draft a center at 10, you trade two first round picks of your very limited pool of assets for another center 5 minutes later.
Well, and how did they get those picks that they gave up for Mark Williams?
Right, doing the trading 4-3 end of the first round draft picks for an unprotected future first round pick that Justin Zanuck from the Jazz, when he made the trade, openly said was the best asset in the league when they made the trade. And I think it's hard to, I think the pick the Hawks got a few months later might have surpassed it, but there are not many assets in the league with more value than that future Suns first that Utah got in exchange for three picks that are, I'd say, probably 80 to 90% likely to be 25 or later in the draft.
All right. Well, that completes the tiers. Now, I just picture you're a
August
Suns
content,
fan.
baby.
You're a
August.
Suns fan. You're scrolling through, saying, "Oh, is this a tier my team's going to be in? Oh, maybe is this a tier my
There is a
team's going to
Suns fan out there that's reading content about the NBA in August. I would suggest to them to go have a nice drink and find a pool and probably leave the state of Arizona where it's 5,000 degrees right now and
be?
chill.
Not in the
That's
north.
what I
In the
would tell
north,
them.
there's some
Not
nice
reading.
parts of northern Arizona.
Ah,
All right. Thank you very much to Jackson, who's got to edit through all this dreck. Thank you to MacMahon and Bontemps. Thank you to you again for sticking with us through August. If you are with us this far into this podcast at this date on the calendar, we love you. We couldn't do it without you. And we will talk to you next week.
nobody provides sunshine like the USWB. Adios, amigos.